Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. As I said in the intro, I brought back one of my favorite guests, a frequent contributor to the Atticus community, my dear friend and colleague, co-coach, adjunct practice advisor, Victor Medina. So Victor, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, I asked you to come back, and your podcast was a huge hit because a lot of people commented on your background, your sales background, some of the things that you do, and you're a natural marketer. You've done a lot of things. And what I wanted to do was bring you back and talk about the one critical skill that I think is necessary to consciously develop to grow a law practice. And I'm not going to hide the ball on this. People might be thinking it's time management. They might be thinking it's marketing, but ultimately it's the core of what we're trained as lawyers, which is persuasion. But outside the legal field, we would call it what, Victor? What would you call it?
Sales. Everyone else calls it sales.
Sales? Sales? Are you telling me that you and I think the most important skill that lawyers can develop to grow their practice is sales skills? Is that what you're putting out today?
That's what I'm putting out today. And I understand why people object to hearing it or, think that it's something that shouldn't apply to them or that label, because they think of sales people and a particular category. We've all heard about the stereotypical car salesman or the door-to-door salesman. And it's a label that people don't want to be painted with, mostly because the majority of the industry that wears that label wears it so poorly, right? It's something that people don't want to be. But as you were saying in the beginning to this, these lawyers we're already trained in the same skill set and art that is sales. And we have this certain heightened responsibility to these clients that we're meeting with to deliver them to a better place. And for some reason, lawyers stop short of using those persuasive skills to be able to convince that person that they in fact need their help and that they should hire them to be better. They kind of stand off almost like, well, if you choose to hire me or not, that's totally up to you. But, I'm not going to have anything more to say about that. Call me if you want to move forward, kind of thing. And not really thinking through how much of service they would be if they could just enhance those skills.
So there's two things there. One is that there's different types of sales methodology. So like product sales, and product sales might fall into, like you said, your copier sales. Then you go into probably hardcore one-on-one relationship selling, right? Which might be more like directly financial advising. And then you have consultative sales. And I think probably as law firms, we fall into consultative sales and a consultative sales role because you're advising, but you're not selling a product. You're ultimately selling a relationship, and you're really selling a consultative relationship. So the big hit for me, and the reason this is an important podcast, an important conversation, and by now the people that are serious are still with us, and those that were like, oh, I'm out. I am not Ned the Head Ryerson from Groundhog Day. I am out of this conversation. Riley's completely lost his freaking mind. But here, when I went from litigation in my practice, and by the way, I was doing tons of advertising as a litigator and tons of marketing. When I went to estate planning and elder law and a little bit corporate law, I realized it was a different ballgame. And I had to, kind of like what you had to do with the physicians, I had to develop relationships with referral sources, accountants, CPAs, financial planners, CFPs. And that pushed me into more of a consultative sales role. And from there, I realized, oh, I don't know a thing about sales. And I read books on sales, and I read 3 or 4 really terrific books on sales. And I took courses on sales. And in fact, I brought a sales consultant in to train our law firm to help us be better at sales and better consulting and better at closing. And it became kind of a secret advantage to us as a law firm. Because if you're a lawyer and you're untrained in any form of sales, even though you're trained in persuasion, you can be persuasive in front of a jury, persuasive to somebody else, but you actually don't know how to think through objections. So one of the things that we did as a law firm is that we put down the top 10 common objections that our referral sources would have when they referred in work. And we taught our advisors sometimes if we had a great relationship, we gave them, like you said, a laminated card because most of our referral sources were trained sales professionals. And we may not call it the 10 objections. It might be something like the 10 concerns or the 10 frustrations or the 10 worries. So we learned how to code that. If you're assuming that we have someone still with us listening to this podcast, and they're like, you may have a point, and you're talking to a lawyer who just opened up their practice or thinking about opening their practice. So I'm going to interrupt you just for a second because as you're listening to the podcast, I want you to think about this. When did you have a horrible, as a customer or end user, have a horrible sales experience? Like you felt like you were treated so bad that you're like, I don't care. I will never go back there again. And then think about where you had an incredible experience where you're like, that was so amazing. I can't wait to go back there and refer my friends and family to that experience. So Victor, I'm going to ask you, I get a little overwhelmed about bad experiences I've had, because there's so many of them. But can you think of a really bad sales experience that you've had as a client or user?
Oh, and it's so ironic that it was my life going in here, but more recently, I had somebody try to sell me to buy a new copier in my office.
How hysterical. Oh, poor guy or gal.
It was awful for them because I could see everything that I either was trained to do 30 years ago off of it. But going through that and coming out of it at the end was such a terrible experience because I felt coming out of there that I needed to be somebody that I didn't want to make it stop and go away. I needed to be a jerk because the person was just not getting any other message out of it. And it felt horrible. Not only do I never want to do experience of again, I don't want to buy a copier from anybody. I hope I never need a copier or a printer off of it because it was such a terrible, terrible experience. And I think the reason for that is that I felt like I was a commodity or a stepping stone in what they were needing to do to either make numbers for the quarter, the end of the year. It was so transparent off of it. It certainly wasn't with respect to service towards me. They never really had any of those concerns. They were very self-interested off of it. And it just felt horrible. It felt horrible. I felt bad doing it.
Okay. Can you give me a good one? Like you're like, okay, that was amazing.
Well, I would tell you that one of the things that I get to do as part of the financial services work that I do, and these are both within a year or so, let's say, is that I have to affiliate myself and my work as an independent insurance broker with somebody out there. There's lots of these people in there. And so this is very similar to the doctor's relationship where the person, how they get paid is actually far removed from the relationship. But in making that decision, I engaged in a very comfortable sales discussion with the person over the course of, let's say, November to the end of December, where in going through that, I, to this day, which is about a year or so into the relationship, feel an enormous sense of gratitude that I'm working with these people versus anything else. And I am a champion for them to other people out in the world that are considering. I was like, you ought to go talk to these folks for that. So that was a completely different sales perspective. And the person was it was clear I was talking to a salesperson, right? I know that was their role, where it was a recruiter or a relationship manager, but their role was to bring somebody like me on board and to agree to be with them. But the posture was so starkly different than the person that was trying to get me to buy the copier, because not only was the circumstance different about how the relationship gets paid, but more importantly, how I was treated throughout and how I ended up feeling out there, which is feeling like, boy, did I get lucky that these people came along when they did. And yet I went through a sales process where I agreed to buy in a situation where I didn't have to agree to buy or affiliate or whatever else. And that there were multiple suitors at that time. And I want to be fair. The other people who were doing this they were close to that too. In other words, they conducted themselves well. I think ultimately, if I had chosen one of the other ones for the reasons that I might have chosen, I probably would have felt similar because they were well trained as salespeople. They were well positioned as in the industry. Like they would have been good to affiliate with because it would have been worked out well. So really, it was how I came out at the end feeling, and that kind of goes to that first point that I was talking about. Is like if you are in the law practice, in part because of how you can serve others, how you can help others people's lives be better. If you get good at sales, you can be in a position where people are feeling great from that, and you're actually magnifying the effect of how you're serving them beyond just in the professional services of what specifically you're doing for them.